Well, as sure as fall turns to winter and winter to spring, dying and rebirth are just a natural part of life. What's unnatural, though, is breaking the family budget or going broke to be able to pay to bury a loved one during such a hard time. Well, Charles Finegan is the owner and CEO of Riverside Funeral Home in Albuquerque and is joining us this morning to talk about the changing funeral business and affordable options at Riverside. Charlie, thanks so much for being here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. What a story about Elizabeth Taylor, huh?
It kind of coinciding with me being here. It's
sure.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, I mean, it's something that we have to deal with. It's the reality. The reality of life is death. And so before we really get into this, let's first address the reality of funerals. Because I think a lot of people wonder, is it better for me to plan ahead during a time where I have a clearer head knowing that this could be something I'm going to have to deal with? Or is it better for people to just do it when the time comes during a grieving process?
It's always better to plan ahead for something like this. You're not making rash decisions. You're not purchasing stuff that you really don't need at the time. Plus, you get to make your own decisions on the merchandise you want, the services you need, and you're not putting all the burden on the family to do that.
Right, and that's a good point, because unfortunately, that's what happens.
Yes.
It ends up being the burden of everybody else during a process where they're trying to just deal with what they've just lost.
Exactly.
And so I would imagine that's tough. Now, you've been doing this for a while, so tell us a little bit about your experience in the funeral business.
I started in Dallas, Texas in 1985, worked for a big corporate funeral home for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Moved here, worked for a funeral home for 1 year, and then I opened my own business in 1994.
94, so you've been doing it a while.
Been doing it quite a while, yeah.
And, you know, I think in something like this business, obviously people need to have a certain trust with you, and I would imagine that you have to develop a special rapport with people, because this is the hardest time that they will ever be going through. And so that must be an interesting thing for you, just personally, to have to deal with these kind of emotions that must go on when you deal with your clients.
Yes, you know, people do trust in you, and as we spoke earlier, it's a very trying time for people, and they're not making rash decisions, and they are going to depend on people to guide them in a way that isn't going to take advantage of them. And being that I am self-employed, and I am the owner of the business, I don't have to answer the corporate world.
Right.
So I don't have to hit the bottom lines. I don't have to sell merchandise. So that's why at Riverside Funeral Home, everything's very affordable.
And I think that would put people at ease. And, you know, speaking of affordability, I want to know really how the business has actually changed over these past 25 years, because I was mentioning that maybe there's more affordability now.
It's actually, that's the way the whole business is going now.
Okay.
People aren't paying $10,000, $12,000 for funerals anymore. They can't afford it.
Right.
And plus you have people such as ourselves that are making arrangements for their loved ones, their mother, their father.
Right.
It's a little younger generation, and they're getting away from the traditional funeral, you know, the caskets and the big church funerals and all like that. And a lot of people aren't affiliated with churches like they used to be. So so everything is changing, and affordability is in everybody's mind now.
What are some of the things that you're seeing as far as the attitudes that people are having? Because you're saying, you know, not everybody's doing the big caskets. What are some of the attitudes and choices that you're seeing people make these days?
Well, more and more people are going the cremation.
Okay.
But it's not just, you know, the cremation, because when people are making funeral arrangements, they don't stop to think that not only do they have to pay the funeral home, but they have to pay the cemeteries. And the cemetery charges can be just, you know, they can be through the roof. Matter of fact, at my funeral home, sometimes the cemetery charges are more expensive than the funeral home charges.
Really? So I would imagine that's probably one of the biggest economical funeral concerns that people have.
And that's why more and more people are going with cremation. We can have a traditional funeral with a cremation where you have a person and we use a casket. We have a traditional, but we don't go to the cemetery. We follow up with the cremation.
Oh, okay. So that not only saves money, but, you know, I mean, it's nice to know that there are options, because, like I said, and like you said as well, I don't think people are thinking rationally during that time. And sometimes the quicker and the easier and the most affordable that you can do this is the better to get through it, because there's a lot of there's a mourning process. There's so much to go through that you don't want the funeral to overtake everything else. Yeah,
and like I said, it's becoming more and more about economics. You know, I mean, with the economy the way it is, and it's just folks cannot afford the $10,000 funerals anymore. And you know, a lot of folks that can't afford it they're not finding the value in it.
Exactly. Well, what sets you guys apart? I mean, what makes you different than other funeral homes?
We are just the most economical funeral home in the state of New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Our most expensive casket is $23.95, and the other funeral homes, the big corporate funeral homes, are charging over $5,000 for the same exact casket, same manufacturer, same warehouse I get it from. It's just that, you know, I don't have to answer to the corporate people.
That's a big thing.
Yes, yeah, and when you're not having to deal with the big corporations, and like I said, I do own the business, so I can set my prices.
Right,
and
make your own rules.
Exactly.
And that's important, and I think people will appreciate that so much. And I want to let people know, of course, how they can find you and where they can find you. Riverside Funeral Home is located at 225 San Mateo Northeast. That's in Albuquerque. And the phone number to call, hopefully you don't have to call it soon, but if you do, which of course is inevitable at some point, 764-9663. And the website is riversidefunerals.com. And I did want to say real quick, you know, Charles and I were just talking about 6 Feet Under and shows like that. And I think those kind of shows are great because they dispel a myth that, you know, people that work in a funeral home are not happy, wonderful, lively, alive people too.
Yeah. Well, we all have lives, and, you know, for a long time, funeral homes I call it smoke and mirrors. But,
right.
You know, and at Riverside Funeral Home, we're a little more down to earth, and,
That's right.
You know, if you come to the office, you don't have an appointment, you're going to find us wearing jeans and, you know, slacks and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Because, you know, funeral directors are people too.
That's right. And I appreciate what you do for everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for being here, Charlie. We appreciate your time, and of course, we appreciate everything that you do for people during the toughest times of their lives.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, it's almost swimsuit season, and we've got this year's hottest swimwear fashions. That is coming up next.